Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get started now. Thanks again for taking the time out to hear a little bit about the new Xcover 6 Pro. We'll go ahead and run through the device, what changes have been made, some of the applications we're looking at, use cases, things like that, and just kind of run through there. Again, your lines are muted, so if anybody's got any questions, just send those in chat. So this device is, of course, based on the Samsung Xcover 6 Pro, which is a Samsung device that's targeting enterprise customers to begin with. So we're starting off with a device that's already rugged. It's already got plenty of good drop protection, protection from water and things like that. So we're starting from a good base there. A reminder, it's only available for the US and Canadian markets. And a couple of big features that we'll get into more detail are, of course, 5G and CBRS ready. If you don't know what CBRS is, we'll talk about that as well. And then, of course, it has the push-to-talk key and another programmable active key. We'll get into the specifics later. So here's the layout of the phone. If you're familiar with the previous generation, it's very, very similar. You've got the programmable button there on top. It does have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. The camera's all there, the programmable button on the side, as well as the PTT button you can see. The display has gotten slightly bigger at 6.6 inches. And then, of course, it has Samsung Knox, all that good stuff. It does have an NFC reader, like most smartphones today, that can be used for high-frequency RFID as well. So if that's something you've got customers using as HF RFID, it's a simple way to read those NFC tags with your phone that you've already got. No need for a separate device. So from an update perspective, from the Galaxy Xcover, you can see the devices do look a little similar. The Xcover 6 does have a case that needs to be worn as part of the certification. On the previous version of that, the Xcover, there was an external case, but it didn't need to be used for Class 1 Division 2 areas. So that is included and is part of the certification. You can see they added 5G with sub 6 gigahertz support, C-band support for CBRS. Again, we'll get into that later. Up the memory, new processor, better processor, Wi-Fi 6E. They added Samsung DeX support to this model, which we didn't have on the previous one. And they upped the ruggedness certification from mil standard 810G to 810H. And some of the new capabilities, again, the 5G is really the big needle mover here. That was something that we needed to go ahead and catch up with the consumer market on as 5G has become pretty prevalent. So we do have a 5G certified Division 2 device available now. Latest Wi-Fi standards, again, upgraded all the memory. The design, 1.5 meter drop, we'll talk about that more later. We'll talk about Samsung DeX. They did also enhance the volume of the speaker for this device, originally from Samsung. So we're getting better, not only voice quality, but better sound out in the field as well. Another thing with this device is Samsung understands for enterprise customers that the consumer life cycle isn't going to cut it. They can't cut off updates after 18 months like they do with a lot of the flagship devices. So they promised 4 OS updates. We've already had one of these, so it launched with 12. The device is on Android 13 now, but they've also promised 5 years of security updates that kind of fits with the Android Enterprise Recommended program as well. So for the connectivity part of things, of course, we've got 5G, so you're going to get faster speeds. This device is available for Verizon and AT&T. T-Mobile's listed there as well. It's compatible with T-Mobile. I don't believe we have the T-Mobile certification for it, but we do for Verizon and AT&T. And all the good stuff with 5G, lower latency, more accuracy. So if you're connected to field devices and you're getting processed data in the field, you're going to get instantaneous results with faster networks. It's also really important when we get into push-to-talk to make sure that you've got as little latency as possible and as little lag when you're trying to use the device to kind of replace radios. Same thing with Wi-Fi 6E. It's just the latest standard of Wi-Fi that's always getting better as well too. So we've got the latest and greatest there. So when you are connected to a Wi-Fi network, you've got the fastest available speeds. So it is ready to support CBRS. I'll talk about specifically what CBRS is for those of you who aren't familiar here in a few slides. But that's basically what's going to be most commonly used for push to talk. So if you want to start looking at using, or customers want to look at using their cell phone to replace the old school, Motorola radios that we've been carrying in the field for 40 years, CBRS is the technology that's going to enable that to happen. And it's just going to give you better network responsiveness as well as security, and I'll cover some of those details down the road. So if you look at the speeds when you compare 5G to 4G, you're going to get close to 8 times faster downlink and up to 12 times faster uplink. So again, just more speed so that you're not spending time if you've got to download a manual or drawings out in the field, or you just need really low latency on those push-to-talk calls. 5G is going to make that happen. So CBRS, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this will be a really quick explainer. For those of you who are, then this is probably pretty well known to you. It stands for Citizens Broadband Radio Service. It's a version of licensed and unlicensed private cellular networks in the 3.5 gigahertz range. So for us, it's band 48 in the US. This is a US specific technology. Canada might use the same band as the US. They might do something a little bit different. But for right now, when I talk about CBRS, it applies exclusively to the USA. But the same general idea is going to apply other places in the world. It just might be a little bit different frequency. So the big thing to understand here is that it can be unlicensed, and there's a spectrum access system in place to make sure spectrum is available in a given geographic location. So because the licenses or the spectrum is unlicensed, it can be much cheaper than having to go spend billions of dollars in an FCC auction to buy up, bandwidth like you hear AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and everybody else fighting over for spectrum. This is unlicensed spectrum that can be used by private companies, but they do have to register the geographic area. So basically the idea would be, a refinery would say, hey, we need a private cellular network that needs to cover this geographic area. They go through the access system to make sure they've got spectrum available and to guarantee it for them. And then it can be blocked off for them for a certain period of time without the huge license fees normally associated with cellular network bands. So, and the benefits for end users are going to be privacy and security. So previously, if a customer had a contract with Verizon or any of the carriers, and they had, secure, vital corporate data going back and forth, they didn't necessarily want that leaving their firewall. But if it's going to go over cellular data, it had to, because it had to go, through the Verizon tower, AT&T tower, or whoever that worked. With a private network, they're in control, and that corporate data can stay behind corporate firewalls and any other safety measures they've got in place at all times. It also allows them to control the way that network's going to perform. So if they want to designate these devices are for our emergency response team, they're going to get priority no matter what, or this data is critical to our process. So whatever we're doing in that facility, this data cannot, get pushed down the hierarchy of what data goes out first. And the company can control that instead of the carrier. So there are some systems in place with carriers for first responders to make sure that, when a hurricane hits the Gulf Coast, that ambulance service, police, fire and rescue, they're going to still be able to use cell service first. If I'm trying to, check on a friend, my call might not go through, but the fire and rescue team's call is going to go through. And you can do the same thing with a private cellular network. The slide says LTE. Now we're talking about private 5G networks. It's all kind of just a different flavor of the same thing. It's all just private cellular networks. Some other benefits for private networks are the mobility handoff between cells is seamless with private cellular. Traditional Wi-Fi, if you're moving from one Wi-Fi access point to another, you might get a little connection loss. It might cause a download error, just a little bit of lag. It's not a big deal. Something that most of us probably wouldn't even notice unless we were in the middle of making a call. but you don't get that with cellular network technology. That was always kind of one of the benefits is you can be driving down the highway and move seamlessly between towers as you're going down. The same thing's going to happen here. And the other benefit really for customers is that cellular networks are going to be cheaper to deploy using the CBRS because the spectrum's unlicensed. They don't need hundreds and hundreds of access points to cover their whole facility. One cellular tower might cover several miles depending on which frequencies they're using. So they can get twice the capacity and up to 4 times the range of traditional Wi-Fi. So instead of 100 wireless access points, you might just need a handful of cellular network installations. So it can be significantly cheaper to deploy, and then you've got all the security benefits that I mentioned earlier as well. So some more about the design of the device itself. It's a rugged design out of the box. It has Corning Gorilla Victus Plus glass. So that's an anti-shock glass for up to 1.5 meters in drops. They moved it up to mill standard 810H, IP68, so dust proof and water resistance. 30 minutes at 1.5 meters underwater, and it does have a glove mode and wet touch mode. Um, Glove mode, I always caution people that's going to depend on the type of gloves. If you're wearing thick leather gloves for an electrician, the screen's probably not going to pick that up. So it's going to depend on the type of gloves you're wearing, but there is a mode to make that work a little bit better when you've got touchscreen compatible gloves and to make sure the screen's going to work well out in the rain as well too, since these devices are designed for it. So Gorilla Glass Victus Plus, that's kind of the latest and greatest in the Gorilla Glass family. So some significant improvements in drop and scratch durability. So you can see they're climbing up to twice the scratch resistance and 25% increase in drop resistance. Some other enhancements, a new CPU. It's a 6 nanometer processor, so it's going to be less temperature, quicker operating, use less battery, up to 1 terabyte of storage. That's going to be with an optional SD card. You've got the 2 programmable keys that can be assigned to various applications or even actions within a specific application with some additional steps. And a lot of that really is, again, behind that walkie-talkie like push-to-talk function that we see a lot of people really looking at these days. And that's a big reason for the CBRS private cellular network stuff is being able to use these devices to replace radios and limit the number of devices that field workers are having to carry. You've got Pogo fast charge and replaceable batteries. The battery is user replaceable on this device. It does need to be done outside of the hazardous area. Samsung DeX mode is a desktop-like experience. I've got another slide with some more details on that. And then push to talk ready. I know I mentioned this a lot, but integration with push to talk apps like Microsoft Teams, ES Chat, Moto Wave, any kind of mission critical push to talk system. It's going to should be compatible with most of the common ones you're going to see there. And of course, the louder speaker, volume for apps based on voice over IP and being able to do the push to talk functions. Samsung DeX is something that Samsung has pushed on a lot of their devices. We've had it on a couple of the other devices that Pepperl+Fuchs has done with Samsung. And it really is a neat feature that we see a lot of interest in. So it's a good little selling point we've got there. Basically, the idea with DeX is you've got a field worker who's going to spend 80, 90% of his time out in the field. Maybe to start off his day, or maybe at the end of the day, he's in an office space where he's sitting down at a desk. Um, but does he really need another PC when he's in that office environment? With DeX, the idea is you can take your phone that you carry for everything else or tablet and just plug it in through HDMI up to a monitor and a wireless mouse and keyboard. It's going to change the user experience or the UI on the phone to make it more compatible with that desktop-like experience. That's the name. You can see kind of what it looks like there in the picture on the right. And the idea again is limiting the amount of devices that mobile workers carry. We see a lot of cases where he's got a radio, he's got gas monitors, he's got a phone, he's got a tablet, he's got a PC that he uses when he's back in the office. And if we can consolidate those onto one phone or one tablet, then we're making their life a whole lot easier. And it's a lot cheaper for the customer as well too. So I talked about the longer life cycle from Samsung on these. So you're going to get 5 years of security maintenance. The Samsung version has been out a little bit longer than ours, but we've still got plenty of security updates for several years on this device to make sure that everything's staying up to date. Samsung Knox is their security protocol that Samsung uses. A lot of you are probably already familiar with that. I'll talk about it more there as well. There is a biometric fingerprint sensor on one of the side keys for the Xcover 6 Pro. You would need to take the gloves off to be able to use that, but it is there as a way to unlock the device if your company policies are good with that. And then all the safety stuff, all the HIPAA. It is an Android Enterprise recommended device and CJIS compliant. So it's got all the safety features from Knox and Android Enterprise, and it also meets some common criteria, safety requirements for some government stuff, and what they require from a safety and security point of view. Samsung Knox, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is really a lot of things in the Samsung world. Um, and I talk a lot about Samsung with this phone because for a customer experience from a carrier perspective, if you put a Verizon SIM card in this, it is a Samsung phone. We're not changing the way the Samsung device operates. We're not changing the way it looks. So from a user experience point of view, it's no different than using a Samsung phone. But Knox is their security platform. It's also they have an MDM solution for managed devices. They have Knox mobile enrollment for enrolling devices into your MDM that your company might already be using. So if customers have any questions about security or device deployments and getting these devices enrolled into their MDM, whether they're using Microsoft Intune or BlackBerry Workspace ONE or whatever their company might be using, there are some tools available to streamline that process for the customer. Let us know so we can get involved and help you out with that part as well, because that can make deployment a lot easier. And if IP has any security concerns, then we can address a lot of that with the Android Enterprise Recommended program, as well as the Knox Security Pro platform. So Android Enterprise Recommended was kind of copied by Android from Samsung and their Knox program. So they're not the exact same thing, but they're very similar. And Samsung has basically said our devices are Android Enterprise Recommended, at least the ones they go that route with. But Samsung Knox kind of takes it another little step further, at least according to Samsung. So, and then from a use case perspective, these are some graphics that I pulled actually from Samsung. So some of these may or may not apply to our customers. Again, we're focused on the Havelock customer base where they need the Class 1 Division 2 certification. But some of the quick ones, you can look at this, and of course, this is being recorded and will be available to you. But you've got all the field-ready stuff to work with gloves. You've got the ability to access local and remote stored documentation. Some of the AR assist and remote expert stuff you can also do with this phone. RFID for tracking devices and PPE and all of that good stuff for asset tracking, even for condition monitoring as part of operations and things like that, can all be done. Everything you got there, these are a little repetitive. There's a couple of these screens, so we'll kind of skip through some of these. But you've got the DeX mode for when you're back in an office space and you need a bigger monitor. And it might just be you've got 3 or 4 people, and instead of trying to all climb around and look at a phone screen, you throw it up on a bigger monitor real quick. And you can do that easily now with Samsung DeX mode. The 5G push talk ready, this is really regurgitating everything we've already looked at. And then, of course, for the utility stuff and more of the oil and gas stuff, push to talk is something that we really see starting to gain a lot of traction with the private networks. The private networks used to be really hard to do, and that technology has gotten to a point now where, sure, there's still a big deployment cost and effort, but it's gotten much simpler to deploy and get that stuff in place. And there's some really big benefits for end users in that route. And that makes the push to talk applications a much easier step to take as well, too. So we're starting to see a lot of customer interest in that and getting a lot of questions about it. And we're trying to make sure we're giving them devices that work well in those scenarios. Some more on applications. A lot of the stuff that you're going to see with a lot of the e-com devices, any type of life cycle management, equipment tracking and localization, keeping track of inventory and tools and equipment, device calibration, data logging, any type of diagnostic software. For anybody that doesn't go by the e-com site all too often, there is an app library there. So if you've got a customer that says, hey, we're interested in push to talk, or hey, we need an application to do inspections on our new tablet with, there's a repository of some third-party applications there as well. It's a good place to get kind of ideas for the things that customers are using our devices for as well. So I do recommend everybody to check that out. On the maintenance side, all the condition-based monitoring, predictive maintenance, operator rounds, inspections, kind of all the standard stuff there. A little bit more detailed look at the specs for anybody who is interested. You can see again, extra memory, the fingerprint sensor, bigger screen, replaceable battery, 4G LTE as well as 5G sub 6 gigahertz. I'll say that right one of these days. Wi-Fi 6E, the IP68, the new MIL standard rating. On a couple of these, you can see it's only allowed in non-hazardous areas, for example, changing the battery. But for anybody who wants to really go over the specs, this slide will be available to you as well. From an accessory standpoint, we are going to have a 6-bay docking station available, a lanyard. So if anybody's worried about fall protection and making sure that the device can't be dropped from height, we do have a lanyard available as well as a belt clip. One other additional note to remember, this is something I think we're all seeing on consumer devices, but most manufacturers are not including the wall outlet with phones anymore. And that goes for Samsung as well, so we're not either. So this particular device is not going to ship with the wall portion. It will have the USB cable, but it won't have the wall charger part that plugs into the wall, the actual power brick. If you need one, we do have those available. You've got the part numbers there as well. From an kind of peripheral device, we've talked a lot about push-to-talk applications and things like that, and it does have a louder speaker, but if you want to make that even easier, we do have our SM1PIS Bluetooth headset that can Bluetooth back to this device, as well as the RSM01. So you've got two options there. This is just a speaker mic. It can be used in the Bluetooth version. There is a corded version. The corded version, at least right now, isn't available with the Xcover 6, so it would be the Bluetooth version. But it's a nice loud speaker. If you're not familiar with this type of device, if you've never seen a policeman or a firefighter with a speaker clipped from their shoulder, this is exactly the same thing, just certified for hazardous areas. So that was our quick overview of the Xcover 6 Pro. Thanks for coming. And if you've got any other questions about this device, any other e-com device, or any P&F device, really, feel free to contact me.